I say mummies, which country comes to mind? Egypt, right? But guess what? The world's oldest mummies have been found in Southeast Asia, from burial sites in China.
Deep in a cave in China, archaeologists found a skeleton that shouldn't exist. Its genes tell an impossible story. This skeleton shares DNA with the first people of the Americas. This discovery breaks all the rules of human migration. Scientists were stumped, and for a good reason. The timeline makes no sense. The geography makes no sense. And get this, the truth is even older and stranger than the unexplainable headline. We're about to uncover how a single set of bones, known as Mengzi Ren, rewrites everything we thought we knew about our past. The wrong mystery. When you hear the headline, a 4,000-year-old skeleton found in China shares DNA with Native Americans, it sounds impossible, a paradox. It breaks every rule in the history books. How could someone in ancient China, thousands of years ago, be directly related to people in the Americas? The two places are separated by the largest ocean on Earth. But here's the thing, that headline is just the tip of a much, much deeper iceberg. And the 4,000-year-old part, that's not even the right skeleton. The real story is so much stranger. But to understand it, we first have to look at another mind-blowing discovery. Because as it turns out, China is full of ancient skeletons that shouldn't be there. In the 1990s, archaeologists were exploring the remote Tarim Basin in northwest China. This is the region of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most brutal landscapes on the planet. Its name basically means, you go in but you don't come out. It's a vast wasteland of shifting sand dunes with scorching hot summers and freezing cold winters. But the crazy part is, the dry, salty soil of this desert is an incredible preservative. And in it, researchers found a graveyard of mummies. These weren't mummies like in Egypt, wrapped in linen. These were natural mummies, perfectly preserved by the desert air. When they dated these bodies, the results were stunning. They were almost 4,000 years old. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was what they looked like. These were not ancient Chinese people, not even close. The bodies had long, reddish-blonde hair. They had high-bridged noses, round eyes, and full beards. They were, without a doubt, European in appearance. One of the most famous is a woman known as the Beauty of Lulan. She was preserved wearing woven woolen clothing, felt hats, and leather boots. She looked like she could have come from ancient Scotland or Scandinavia. This was a WTF moment for history. What were Caucasian people doing in the middle of a Chinese desert 4,000 years ago? This discovery launched 1,000 theories. They were traders on an early unknown Silk Road. They were a lost tribe, an ancient migration that history completely forgot. Some even said they were the Tocharians, a mysterious people who spoke an ancient Indo-European language in that very region, but thousands of years later. For decades, this was the great, unexplained skeleton mystery of China. How did Europeans get there? The DNA evidence, when it finally came, just made the puzzle deeper. It showed they were a mix of ancient Siberian hunters and Bronze Age farmers from the mountains of Central Asia. They were a group all their own, a unique blend of East and West who built an entire civilization in the desert, only to be swallowed by the sands and forgotten by time. This story of the Tarim mummies is a perfect example of how one discovery can shatter our simple, clean maps of the past. It proves that ancient people moved in ways we never thought possible. But here's the catch. As wild as the Tarim mummies are, they are not the skeletons that link China to Native Americans. That discovery is 10,000 years older and 1,000 times more revolutionary. The 4,000-year-old European mummies were a headline. But the 14,000-year-old skeleton from a cave in the south? That was the one that held the real secret. That was the one that nobody could explain. The Tarim mummies looked wrong, but the next skull's DNA was impossible. The woman named Mengzi Ren. Let's leave the 4,000-year-old Tarim mummies in their desert sands and travel thousands of miles south to the Yunnan province. This region is the polar opposite of the Tarim Basin. It's not a dry, salty desert. It's a lush, subtropical, mountainous region full of forests and rivers. It's hot and it's humid. And it's here in 1989 that researchers digging in a cave called Maludong or Red Deer Cave found a collection of bones. The cave got its name from the huge number of giant red deer bones found inside, many of them showing marks from being cooked. Clearly, ancient people had lived and eaten here, but among the animal bones, they found a partial human skeleton. The most important piece was a cranium, a skull cap, and right away the scientists knew something was off. The skull, which they nicknamed Mengzi Ren or MZR, looked ancient, and not ancient like a modern human from a few thousand years ago. It looked archaic. It had a thick, heavy brow ridge, a feature we associate with much older humans, like Neanderthals. The skull was wide, the jaw seemed robust, and the nasal opening was broad. It just didn't look like any modern Homo sapiens living in Asia today. This kicked off a scientific firestorm that lasted for 30 years. The discovery sparked a massive controversy. What most people don't realize is that this single skull was at the center of a huge debate. One group of scientists argued that this had to be a new human species, a primitive, archaic human that somehow survived, isolated in the forests of Yunnan long after everyone else of its kind was gone. They called them the Red Deer Cave people. This was a huge claim. Think about it. This would be like finding a living, breathing Neanderthal in the 21st century. The other theory was just as wild. Maybe it was a hybrid A mix between a modern Homo sapiens and an archaic human we hadn't even discovered yet, like the Denisovans, who we know were in Asia. The debate raged on for decades, but the biggest puzzle was the age. When they finally got a solid radiocarbon date for Mengzi Ren, the number that came back was an absolute bombshell. The skeleton wasn't 100,000 years old. It wasn't 40,000 years old. It was 14,000 years old. Let that sink in. This was at the absolute end of the last ice age. By this time, Homo sapiens were supposed to be the only humans on the planet. We had already been in Europe for 30,000 years. We were already in Australia, and as we'll see, we were already in the Americas. And yet, here in a cave in China was a person who looked like they belonged to a different era. This discovery suggested an incredible possibility. A different kind of human was living alongside our ancestors right up to the dawn of agriculture. For 3 decades, this was the mystery. Was it a new species? Was it a hybrid? Nobody could prove it. The skull sat in a museum collection, one of the biggest question marks in human evolution. Then, in 2018, the technology finally caught up. A team of Chinese researchers decided to try the impossible. They were going to get DNA out of that skull. Now, this is one of the hardest things in science. DNA, the molecule of life, is incredibly fragile. It shatters over time. In cold, dry places like Siberia, you can get DNA from a 40,000-year-old finger bone. That's how we discovered the Denisovans. But in a hot, humid, subtropical place like Yunnan, it's a nightmare. The heat and moisture shred DNA to pieces. Most scientists thought it was a lost cause. The team had to be perfect. They drilled into the petrous bone, the densest part of the skull located in the inner ear. This is a tiny, rock-hard bone that acts like a genetic vault, protecting DNA long after it has vanished from everywhere else. They had to use sterile labs, low-temperature processing, and sift through mountains of contamination from bacteria and soil. After all that work, they got it. It was a tiny amount, less than 1% of the whole genome, but it was enough. In 2022, they published their results, and the world of archaeology was shaken to its core. First, they solved the 30-year-old mystery. Was Mengzi Ren a new species? Was it a hybrid? The answer was a clear, thunderous no. The DNA proved 100% that the skull belonged to a Homo sapiens. She was a woman who lived and passed away in her 20s or 30s. This solved the archaic human mystery. Those strange features, the thick brow ridges and wide nose, they weren't from a different species. They were simply features of a population of our species that we had never seen before. It was a sign of the incredible human diversity that existed at the end of the Ice Age, a diversity we have since lost. But in solving one mystery, the DNA opened a brand new one, a mystery that was infinitely bigger. The team looked at her mitochondrial DNA, the special code you only get from your mother, which traces a direct maternal line back through time. Her line was something called haplogroup R9C. This was a wow moment all on its own. This genetic lineage is extinct today. You cannot find it in anyone living on mainland Asia. It is a ghost. It's an incredibly old branch of the human family tree, one that seems to have split off from other East Asian populations around 50,000 years ago. This woman, Mengzi Ren, was part of a lost ancient group of people who had been in southern China for an unimaginably long time. But then came the WTF moment, the moment that ties back to our original impossible headline. The team analyzed her nuclear DNA, the main genome you get from both parents. They compared her code to populations all over the world, ancient and modern. And they found it. A deep, direct, and scientifically undeniable genetic relationship to the ancestors of Native Americans. Let's be crystal clear, because this is the core of the paradox. Mengzi Ren's DNA showed a close, sister-like relationship to the ancient Paleo-Siberian populations. These are the people who thousands of years ago would cross the Bering Land Bridge and become the founding population of all Native Americans. The connection was concrete. Modern Native Americans, from tribes in North America all the way down to the Amazonian Caritiana and Surui people in Brazil, inherit about 9 to 15% of their total DNA from this exact same East Asian source population. And here was a member of that source population living, breathing, and eating deer in a cave in southern China 14,000 years ago. This was the paradox. This was the unexplained discovery. How? How could this woman in southern China be a close relative to people who would build civilizations in the Americas? The two locations are separated by over 7,000 miles, not to mention the massive Pacific Ocean. The timelines, the geography, it all seemed impossible. This one skull had suddenly connected southern China to Brazil. This was the unexplained part. For a moment, it seemed like all of human history was completely and totally broken. How could her DNA be in two places at once? The answer was a ghost. Who was Tianyuan Man? So here's the deal. A 14,000-year-old skeleton from a cave in southern China is genetically a sister to people in the Amazon. How is that possible? This mystery seems impossible if you're thinking about the world the way it looks today. But 14,000 years ago, during the late Pleistocene, the world was a completely different planet. The last ice age was just ending. The geography was not the same. Massive ice sheets, some over 2 miles thick, covered almost all of Canada, and the northern United States sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, exposing vast new lands that are now deep underwater. The old theory of how the Americas were populated is the one we all learned in school. It was simple. About 13,000 years ago, a single group of hunters, known as the Clovis people, followed woolly mammoths and other big game out of Siberia. They crossed a land bridge called Beringia, found a magical ice-free corridor that opened up in Canada, and streamed south to populate 2 entire continents in just a few hundred years. It was a nice, clean story. It's not that simple, though. That story is almost completely wrong, and Mengzi Ren is the proof. The real story is so much bigger, messier, and more complex. Scientists now have a model that explains this, and it's called the Beringian standstill hypothesis. What most people don't realize is that Beringia, the land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska, wasn't just a narrow, icy hallway. Because sea levels were so low, it was a massive subcontinent. It was a huge piece of land, hundreds of miles wide. Full of its own plants and animals, it was a world unto itself. And for about 10,000 years, people lived there. Here's the new timeline. Around 25,000 years ago, a group of people from Siberia and East Asia moved into Beringia. But they couldn't go any further. They were stuck. To the west, new glaciers in Siberia had cut them off from the rest of Asia. To the east, the giant Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets over Canada blocked all paths south. They were trapped on this lost continent. So they just stayed. For 10,000 years, that's twice as long as all of recorded history, this population lived in isolation on the Beringian subcontinent. They hunted, they fished, they developed their own unique culture, and their DNA drifted and changed, creating a distinct genetic signature. This is the ghost population that scientists had been looking for. They are the founding ancestors of all Native Americans. The crazy part is, this ghost population wasn't from just one spot in Siberia. The genetic evidence, now powerfully backed up by Mengzi Ren, shows that this founding group was a mix. It was a combination of northern East Asians from Siberia and southern East Asians. People just like Mengzi Ren. So here's the aha moment. This is how the mystery is solved. The woman from Red Deer Cave, Mengzi Ren, was not an ancestor who somehow sailed across the Pacific. Her people didn't go to the Americas. Her relatives did. Here's what scientists think happened. Thousands of years before Mengzi Ren was born, there was a large, sprawling population of Homo sapiens living all along the Pacific coast of Asia. They stretched from the subtropical south, like in Yunnan, all the way up to the cold north. They were likely a coastal people living on seafood and traveling by boat. Some of these southern coastal people, who were relatives of Mengzi Ren's ancestors, traveled north along the coast. They moved past China, past Japan, and eventually reached Beringia. There they met and mixed with the northern groups from Siberia. This new mixed population is the one that got stuck in Beringia for 10,000 years, and it was their descendants who, when the ice finally began to melt around 15,000 years ago, moved south and populated the Americas. This explains everything. It explains why Mengzi Ren in southern China shares this deep DNA link. She is a descendant of the same source population that sent some of its relatives north on that epic journey. And what happened to her specific group, the R9C lineage back in China? Basically, they vanished. Her genetic line went extinct in Asia. Why? Most likely, they were simply swamped by later massive migrations of other people, like the agriculturalists who brought rice and millet farming, the ancestors of the modern Han Chinese, sweeping down from the north thousands of years later. So this incredible genetic line, R9C, survived only because some of its ancient relatives had left the continent entirely and started a new life in a new world. Mengzi Ren is a snapshot of this lost group right before they faded from Asia forever. And get this, she's not alone. This discovery is so powerful because it locks in perfectly with another mind-blowing find, this one from northern China. This is the story of Tianyuan Man. In 2003, researchers found a skeleton in Tianyuan Cave near Beijing. This location is thousands of miles north of Mengzi Ren's cave in Yunnan. But the most stunning part was the age. This skeleton wasn't 14,000 years old. It was 40,000 years old. That's almost 3 times as old as Mengzi Ren. This individual lived in a world still dominated by Neanderthals and giant Ice Age beasts. And using incredible new techniques, scientists managed to get his DNA too. When they sequenced his genome, they found the exact same story. Tianyuan Man was an early modern human, one of the first to live in East Asia. And his DNA showed he was a direct ancestor of 2 major groups, modern East Asians and Native Americans. This is incredible. This find, combined with Mengzi Ren, paints a stunning picture. It means that the ghost population that would eventually give rise to the first Americans was already present and spreading through China 40,000 years ago. This isn't a recent, weird connection. This is one of the deepest, oldest ancestral lines in all of human history. Mengzi Ren is just a later survivor. But what if that's not the whole story? The Beringian standstill model is the mainstream scientific explanation. It's elegant and it's backed by the DNA of Tianyuan Man and Mengzi Ren. But it's not the only theory, and it might not explain everything. Some scientists and a lot of outside-the-box thinkers look at this China-America connection and point to something far more dramatic. The Beringian route makes sense, but it's slow. And it's cold. What if there was another way? A faster, more direct route? What if the unexplained part is true because people were crossing the Pacific Ocean thousands of years before we thought it was possible? This is where the story gets really wild. Secrets in the blood. The Beringian ghost population theory is the one you'll read in textbooks. It's the official story, but for some it just doesn't sit right. It feels too clean, too simple. The Pacific Ocean is the single largest feature on our planet. It's over 10,000 miles wide. For all of recorded history, we've seen it as the ultimate barrier, a vast, empty blue that kept the old world and the new world separate. But what if it wasn't a barrier? What if it was a highway? This is where the wild theories come in, and the crazy part is, some of them have some very compelling evidence. Let's start with the Polynesians. We know for a fact that Polynesians were the greatest seafarers in human history. Using nothing but the stars, the currents, and the flight of birds, they colonized a vast triangle of the Pacific from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand. This was an incredible feat. And get this, we now know they made it all the way to South America. How do we know? The sweet potato. The sweet potato is a plant that was first domesticated in the Andes in South America. But when Europeans first discovered Polynesia, the sweet potato was already a staple food on remote islands thousands of miles away. DNA testing on ancient sweet potatoes confirms it. Polynesians sailed to South America, got the sweet potato, and sailed back all before 1200 AD. So we know trans-Pacific contact happened. That's a fact. But that was 800 years ago. The theorists ask if they could do it then, why couldn't others do it earlier? This brings us to the Kon-Tiki theory. In 1947, a Norwegian explorer named Thor Heyerdahl set out to prove a wild idea. He believed that South America had been settled from Polynesia, not the other way around. To prove it, he built a primitive balsa wood raft, named it the Kon-Tiki, and set sail from the coast of Peru. For 101 days, he and his crew drifted on the ocean currents, eventually landing on an atoll in Polynesia. He proved that even with the most basic technology, the journey was possible. Now, Heyerdahl's original theory was mostly wrong. The DNA evidence is clear. Polynesia was settled from Asia, but his experiment proved a powerful point. The ocean currents do connect the continents. So let's go back to China. We have Mengzi Ren with her 14,000-year-old genetic link. We have the 40,000-year-old Tianyuan man. These people were part of a southern coastal population. What does a coastal population do? They build boats, they fish, they explore the coast. How far could they have gone? This leads to some of the most controversial theories. One, pushed by a man named Gavin Menzies, is the 1421 theory. He claimed that a massive Chinese treasure fleet, commanded by Admiral Zheng He, didn't just explore Africa and the Indian Ocean, it circumnavigated the globe. He argues they sailed across the Pacific, mapped the coast of California, and even sailed around South America, all 70 years before Columbus. Mainstream historians call this total fiction. They say there's zero archaeological evidence, that the maps are fakes and the records are misinterpreted. But the idea is tantalizing. If a massive fleet could do it in 1421, could smaller, more desperate groups have done it thousands of years earlier? Could a storm have blown a boat of ancient Chinese explorers off course, carrying them all the way to Mexico? And this is where we find another piece of unexplained DNA. A real one, it's called haplogroup X. This is one of the deepest, weirdest mysteries in all of human genetics. Like Mengzi Ren's R9C, this is a mitochondrial haplogroup tracing a maternal line. About 3% of all Native Americans belong to haplogroup X. So what? Here's the catch. All the other Native American haplogroups, A, B, C, and D, are clearly and obviously from East Asia. They fit the Beringian model perfectly. Haplogroup X does not. Its closest relatives aren't in China or Siberia or Japan. They're in the Middle East and Europe. It's found in the Druze people of Israel, in ancient Egyptians, and in populations around the Mediterranean. So how did a Middle Eastern European genetic lineage end up in Native American populations, specifically around the Great Lakes region 20,000 years ago? This is a real mystery that nobody can explain. The Beringian model hates this. This anomaly is what gave rise to another wild theory, the Solutrean hypothesis, which says that ancient Europeans crossed the Atlantic in skin boats following the ice shelf and became the first Americans. Most scientists think this is impossible. So if they didn't cross the Atlantic, how did haplogroup X get there? The official explanation is that it did come from Asia, from a ghost population in Siberia that had both Asian and Middle Eastern ancestry, and this population crossed Beringia, and we just haven't found their skeletons yet. That's a lot of what-ifs. The wild theorists look at haplogroup X, they look at Mengzi Ren's Southern Chinese DNA, and they say the official story is missing the plot. The answer, they claim, isn't a land bridge, it's the ocean. And then, there's the wildest theory of all, the lost continent of Mu. This is pure 100% fringe territory. but it's a theory that just won't go away. The idea, popularized in the 19th century, is that there was once a massive continent in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was a lush, tropical paradise, home to an advanced, ancient civilization. They were the mother culture of the world. Then, in a cataclysmic event, the continent sank beneath the waves, just like Atlantis in the Atlantic, who were the survivors. They were the people who fled in all directions. Some, they say, fled east to the coast of South America, becoming the ancestors of the Inca. Others fled west to Asia, becoming the ancestors of the ancient Chinese. Under this theory, the DNA link isn't a mystery at all. Mengzi Ren in China and the Caritiana in Brazil don't share DNA because one group traveled 7,000 miles. They share DNA because they are both descendants of the same lost homeland. Is there any scientific evidence for this? Absolutely not. Geologists are clear there is no sunken continent in the Pacific. It's a fantasy. But people watching this are looking for a mystery. And the fact that we are finding all these ghost populations in Siberia, in southern China, and these impossible DNA links, it makes you wonder, what if history is not a straight line at all? What if our ancient past is a story of lost worlds? So what is the truth? We have a 4,000-year-old headline, a 14,000-year-old skeleton, a 40,000-year-old ancestor, and a host of wild theories involving lost continents and impossible ocean voyages. What's the real story? Let's go back to the beginning, the 4,000-year-old skeleton in the title. As we saw, that was a red herring. It's most likely a garbled-up version of the Tarim mummies. Those mummies are a real 4,000-year-old mystery. They are skeletons in China that seem to be in the wrong place, but their DNA links them to Europeans and Central Asians, not Native Americans. That's a different, amazing story for another day. The real skeleton at the heart of our story is Mengzi Ren, and she is 14,000 years old. The mystery of her archaic appearance is solved. She was just a Homo sapiens from a population with high genetic diversity, a look that has since vanished from the human gene pool. But the real paradox, her impossible DNA link to Native Americans, is also solved. And the solution is, in its own way, just as fantastic as any wild theory. The verdict is that the Beringian standstill model is, without a doubt, the core of the story. The science on this is solid. The DNA doesn't lie. There was a ghost population that lived on a lost subcontinent, Beringia, for 10,000 years, and this population was a mix of ancestors from both northern Siberia and the southern coast of Asia. The people of Mengzi Ren, is our history still buried in ghost DNA? Or was a lost civilization the real starting point? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.